Arizona Territory, 1883. The wind kicked up dust across the cracked earth, and Oliver Vaughan pulled his horse to a slow stop at the edge of a dead mining town called Mercy Gulch. The sun was brutal, casting sharp shadows over the collapsed buildings and the single rusted well. He had not expected to find a soul out here, but then he saw her. She stood barefoot in the center of the road, her light blue dress clinging to her legs from the breeze, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her world together. Her long, dark hair whipped around her face. Her feet were caked in red dust, and her eyes sharp, angry, and scared met his. Oliver swung down from his saddle, boots landing with a solid thud. He took a few steps toward her, hands open, low and easy. "Darlin," he said, voice low and sure, "those feet were meant to dance." She blinked, startled. For a second her mouth trembled like she might cry, but she didn't. She straightened instead, chin tilting up like a challenge. "I do not dance for strangers," she said. Oliver smiled, not the kind that meant anything more than kindness. "Then let me not be one." She hesitated, then gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "You are not from around here." "No one is," he said, glancing around. "This place has been dead 5 years." "What are you doing here?" She looked past him, toward the empty hills. "Waiting." "For what?" She did not answer. Oliver's chest tightened. He had spent 2 weeks riding between ruined towns and sunburned canyons, looking for nothing in particular. Maybe that was a lie. Maybe he had been looking for something that felt like purpose again. He had not expected it to be a barefoot woman with dust on her cheeks and grief in her voice. "I'm Oliver Vaughan," he said, "cattleman out of Prescott, just passing through." "Zadie Lovell," she said after a moment. "This was my home. Before," he nodded. "Before what?" She walked past him then, slow and careful over the hot ground, toward an old house with a buckled porch. It had half a roof and a broken door hanging from one hinge. She stepped onto the porch like it was sacred. "My father died out here," she said. "Silver dried up, so did the people. He would not leave. Then the fever came, took him and my brothers. I was 17. Oliver took his hat off, holding it against his chest. "That was 6 years ago," she added. "I came back 2 days ago." "I do not know why." He looked down at her bare feet. "You got shoes?" She shook her head. "You got food?" Her silence answered that. "I got both," he said, "and a horse." "I am not going with you. I am not asking you to. I am offering you a meal, maybe shade. Maybe a little rest." He glanced around. "There is nothing left here, Zadie." She stared at him for a long time. Then she nodded once. They sat under the only tree nearby, brittle and half dead, but enough to cast a shadow. He gave her jerky, bread, and a canteen. She ate quietly, without shame. When she finished, she leaned back against the trunk with her eyes closed. "You always help strangers?" she asked. "Only the ones who look like they need it." "I do not need saving." "I believe you," he said, "but a little help never hurt." She did not answer. But she did not push him away either. That night he built a fire between 2 crumbling buildings. She sat across from him, wrapped in his spare blanket. Her dress was cleaner now. He had let her use some of the water to wash. "I was going to dance in Tucson," she said suddenly. "Before everything happened. I had a place at the academy. They called it ballet, but I just liked the way it felt, moving." He looked at her feet again, the calloused toes, the red dust. "I can see it," he said. "You moving like the wind." She smiled, small and true. The next morning she stood beside his horse, arms folded. "I should not be alone out here," she said. "Not anymore." He raised a brow. "You want to come with me? I want to leave this place. And I do not know where else to go." He nodded. "Prescott's a good town, decent people. I have a small ranch just north of it. You can stay in the bunkhouse for now if that suits you." She studied him. "You do not expect anything?" "No." She tilted her head. "You are a rare one." He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. They rode toward the horizon, the wind behind them. Over the next few days she stayed quiet, but she watched everything. She asked questions about the cattle, the land, the way he managed the ranch. She carried herself with quiet strength, never asking for more than she needed. On the fourth night she stood barefoot again outside the bunkhouse, moonlight catching her hair. She turned when she heard him. "I feel like I can breathe here," she said. "That is strange." "Not strange at all," he said. "Some places carry too much pain. Some carry peace." He walked closer, his boots sinking into the dirt beside her bare feet. "You still want to dance?" he asked. "Always," she whispered. He reached for her hand, slow and careful. She let him take it. There was no music, just the wind and the quiet hum of night sounds. But he stepped with her anyway, one arm around her waist, the other holding her hand light. She moved softly, like she remembered every step. They danced in the dust under the stars, and Oliver knew something had changed. And Zadie leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes. The bunkhouse smelled of dry cedar and saddle soap. Zadie folded the patchwork quilt down from her cot, the fabric worn soft with age. Outside, the sky was beginning to pinken at the edges, the kind of morning that promised heat by midday. She dipped her apron in the basin and wrung it out, wiping down the table she'd dusted twice already. A knock sounded on the open frame. She didn't turn. "You keep cleaning like that, you'll scrub the wood to splinters," Oliver said as he stepped just inside, hat in hand. "I need something to do with my hands," she answered. He leaned against the doorframe, gaze settling on the neat row of herbs she'd set to dry along the wall. "You make yourself useful quick." "I know work," she said, twisting the apron in her hands. "Idle days make for restless nights. You sleep at all?" She shook her head. "Some." He stepped aside as she moved past him, her boots scuffing the packed dirt. He'd found them for her the day before, exchanged a rifle he didn't much care for with a passing peddler. They were a little big, but she wore them without complaint. They walked together past the barn, where the cattle lowed softly inside the corral. The morning air still held a trace of coolness, and the scattered mesquite trees reached long shadows across the dry grass. She paused at the edge of the fence, fingers curling over the top rail. "You ever think about going back," she asked, "to somewhere you left behind?" He rested one boot on the lower rail. "Once, thought about Kansas where I was born." "But it's not the same place now." She nodded, eyes fixed on a calf nosing at its mother's flank. "Places change, people too." He glanced at her then. "You afraid of changing? I'm afraid of staying the same." They stood in silence after that, the kind that didn't push or rush. When the sun cleared the ridge, she turned toward the house and said, "You said you needed help mending the gate." He followed her, tools in hand. The gate had sagged under its own weight, the hinges pulling from the post. Zadie held the board steady while Oliver hammered new nails. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing a long scar down her forearm. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. By midday, sweat clung to their necks and the hammer's rhythm had slowed. Oliver wiped his brow with his sleeve and passed her the last hinge. "You always take to work this quick." "I was raised on it," she said. "No one else around to fix things." "You mind it," she paused, then met his eyes. "I mind the silence after." He straightened. "You don't have to sit alone at supper." "I wasn't sure if I should." "You live here now, Zadie. That makes you kin enough for the table." That evening she sat across from him in the kitchen, the light from the oil lamp flickering between them. Her plate was nearly empty, save for the crust of cornbread she pushed around with her fork. "You cook this?" she asked. He nodded. "Most nights, unless the ranch hands are around. They're off toward Ash Fork for 2 weeks. It's good. Real food's hard to come by in small places. You had lean times, most of my life." She wiped her fingers on the cloth. It's strange to eat slow. I keep thinking I ought to save it. He pushed the biscuit plate toward her. You don't have to now. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. More like something close to it. Later, as he swept out the hearth, she stood by the window, arms crossed. There's a way you carry yourself, she said. What way is that? Like a man who's lost something but doesn't speak of it. He looked up. You see all that just from how I walk. I see it in your shoulders, in how you look at the land like you're waiting for someone to come back across it. He set the broom aside. I lost a brother in the war, never got his letter home. I reckon I still carry that. She nodded once. That kind of ache doesn't leave. He didn't reply, but the silence between them held steady, not heavy. Before turning in, she paused at the door. You ever teach anyone to ride? Plenty. I want to learn properly. He offered a short nod. We'll start at dawn. She didn't look back, but her voice was softer than it had been all day. Thank you, Oliver. When the door clicked shut behind her, he stood alone in the quiet room, the firelight throwing long shadows across the floor. He hadn't realized until just then how long it had been since someone had said his name like that with trust, and not sorrow. The gelding shifted under Zadie's weight as Oliver led them into the lower pasture at first light. She held the reins too tight, her back stiff, jaw set like she was bracing for a storm. You're not steering a wagon, Oliver said, walking beside her. Let your hands breathe a little. I don't want to fall, she muttered. You won't. He's steady. And I'm right here. She loosened her grip, just enough to give the horse his head. Oliver watched her posture change by degrees, the tension in her shoulders giving way as the gelding responded. You ever name him? She asked. Never saw the point. She rubbed her thumb along the leather. Feels wrong, riding something without calling it by name. Oliver stopped beside a mesquite stump and looked up at her. You want to name him? Go ahead. She studied the horse's ears, then the slope of his neck. He looks like a jasper. Jasper it is, then. Later, after they circled the pasture twice without mishap, Oliver stepped back and let her guide the horse alone. Zadie's face didn't change much, but her spine settled into a rhythm, her knees adjusting without thought. When she made the turn without prompting, he nodded to himself. You're a quick learner. I was watching you yesterday, she said, not looking down. You ride like the saddle's part of you. I've had time to practice. I'd like to get that good. You will. By noon, the sky had burned the clouds off, and the wind carried the sharp edge of dry earth. They returned the horse to the stable, and Zadie leaned against the stall door, brushing her fingers through Jasper's mane. You're quiet today, she said. You're doing the talking. She glanced at him. You always let people find their own footing, only when they want it. She looked down at Jasper's hooves, scratched her forearm. I used to think if I worked hard enough, I'd earn a place somewhere, a room, a voice at a table. You got both now, I know. That's the thing. Oliver waited, not pressing. It's easier to survive than to stay, she said at last. He leaned one shoulder against the post. How so? Surviving's just waking up, doing what you must. Staying means choosing it, letting it matter. It already matters, he said. She didn't answer. But she didn't turn away either. The afternoon passed with fencing. One of the corner posts had split at the base. Zadie hauled the new post while Oliver dug out the old one, sweat running down the side of his neck. She didn't complain, though her palms blistered before the work was done. When they sat for supper, neither of them spoke for a long time. The cicadas had started up, and the light outside had gone gold. Zadie picked at the hem of her sleeve. I keep remembering a moment, she said. Before the sickness. My brother Jacob had a fiddle. He played it crooked, but we danced anyway, just once in the dirt behind the house. Oliver listened, his spoon idle in his hand. I was laughing. I remember that more than anything, how light I felt. Like I hadn't been afraid yet. He waited, not wanting to interrupt what felt like the edge of something deeper. I want to find that again. Not the music, just the part of me that could laugh like that. You will. She looked at him, really looked like she was measuring his certainty. You say that like you believe it. I do, because I see the part of you that remembers how. She folded her hands in her lap. I don't know what you're hoping for. I'm not hoping for anything you don't want to give. I don't know what I want yet. I can wait, Zadie. The silence between them stretched, but it held steady, like the slow draw of breath after a long climb. That night, she stood at the edge of the porch, arms wrapped loosely around herself, watching the stars bleed through the last of the dusk. When she turned, Oliver was there, leaning against the rail. I used to think if I ever got out, I'd never look back, she said. You still can. I don't want to anymore. He didn't move, didn't reach for her, but he was close enough she could feel the warmth off him. I don't know what's ahead, she said, but I think I'd like to find out here. With me, her voice was steady. With you. He tipped his hat back, his mouth soft with something he didn't name but felt all the same. I'd be proud to share that road. She stepped closer, the porch boards creaking under her weight. She reached for his hand, unsure, but he met her halfway, fingers closing around hers without question. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Beneath the open sky, with their hands folded together, it was enough. A week passed, marked in quiet tasks and the slow turning of late summer. The heat settled deeper into the earth, and the sky took on that hard, bleached look it wore in the Arizona territory when rain forgot the land. The cattle shifted toward the shade of the ridgeline by midday, and the creek that ran along the north edge of the pasture had thinned to a trickle. Zadie stood knee-deep in the herb garden behind the barn, coaxing what she could from the stubborn soil. She'd split one of Oliver's old flour sacks to shade the roots of the sage, and planted a line of pennyroyal along the fence just to see if it would take. Her fingertips were stained green, and a fine layer of grit clung to her arms. Oliver came up from the lower paddock, leading a bay mare with a limp in her left foreleg. He stopped when he saw her crouched beside the rosemary, her braid falling forward over her shoulder. "You planning to turn the whole yard into a healer's den?" he asked, setting the mare's reins over the post. She didn't look up. "If I can get half these plants to root, you won't need to ride all the way to town every time someone coughs. You planning on doctoring the cattle too? Only the ones who ask nicely." He leaned against the fence, watching her pull a small stone from the base of the thyme. "You know what you're doing with all that? My mother kept a book of remedies," she said, "wrote her own notes in the margins. I still remember the smell of it, dried mint and lamp oil. She passed young. She was already gone before we came to Mercy Gulch." Zadie set the stone aside and wiped her hands on her skirt. "My father tried to keep it up, the herbs and tinctures, but he was better with pickaxes than poultices." Oliver didn't press. Instead, he unlaced the mare's hoof boot and crouched low to check the swelling. The quiet between them was easy now, filled with the sound of crickets and the faint clatter of a windmill turning slow over the well house. When he stood again, he glanced toward the bunkhouse. "How's your hand?" She held up her left palm. A thin strip of linen was wrapped around the base of her thumb. "Mostly stiff, doesn't sting anymore. You keep working it, it won't lock up. I've been sewing in the evenings. That helps." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded length of cotton. "I picked this up from the peddler yesterday. Thought maybe you could use it." She unfolded it. The fabric was soft, patterned with small, faded roses. "What made you think of this?" he shrugged, looking out toward the scrub hills. "Didn't seem right. You mending everything with scraps." Zadie watched him a moment, then folded the cloth back up and held it close to her apron. "Thank you." That night, the air cooled just enough to sit out by the fire pit. Zadie brought out the tin cups, and Oliver poured the last of the chicory brew. They sat on either side of the flames, the stars sharp above them. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her cup slowly. He waited. "There's an old schoolhouse down the road toward the canyon fork. Roof still on. Glass is gone, but the frame's solid." "I know the place," he said. "Used to be run by a woman named Dorsey. She left after the Apache raids. No one's touched it since. I could clean it up, fix the shutters. Maybe get a few books from town. You want to teach?" "I think I want to make something that lasts." She looked into the fire. "Something useful." Oliver turned his cup in his hands. "I can help you get the roof patched. And we can ask the ranchers nearby if they've got children needing lessons." She nodded, then hesitated. "Would you come there if I opened it, if you asked?" He leaned back, stretching his legs toward the fire. Her hand rested on her knee, fingers twitching with thought. "I used to think the only thing I had to offer was my dancing," she said. "It was the only time people looked at me and saw something worth keeping." "I see you," he said, voice low, "even when you're still." She looked over at him, eyes catching the firelight. "I mean it," he said. "You don't have to move to be worth watching." She didn't speak at first. Then she set her cup down and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside him. "I don't know how to be looked at like that," she said. "You learn," he said. "Same way you learn to ride. One step at a time." Zadie reached out and took his hand, not like before, not careful or uncertain, but with quiet purpose. He closed his fingers around hers, his thumb brushing the bandage at the heel of her palm. "You've got a strong grip," he said. "I've had to hold on tight," she answered. "You don't have to anymore," he said. She leaned in, her shoulder against his, her head resting just below his jaw. He wrapped his arm around her, steady and sure. Neither of them said anything more. The fire crackled low. The stars wheeled overhead. And the wind carried the faint scent of rosemary and dust. The schoolhouse stood on a rise overlooking the valley, its clapboard siding dulled by sun and time. Zadie stood in the doorway, a hammer in one hand, her hair tied up in a red kerchief Oliver had found in the back of a trunk. A ladder leaned against the eaves where he was fitting the last of the patched shingles into place. "You've got a steady hand," she called up. He glanced down, a sliver of sweat running slow along his temple. "Years of fixing fence, rails'll do that." Zadie stepped inside, where the floorboards still held the scent of cedar soaked deep into the grain. She'd spent the last 3 days sweeping out nests, scrubbing soot from the old stove, and painting the window frames a pale cornflower blue with a tin of leftover pigment from the mercantile. On the wall, she'd hung a slate board salvaged from the church ruins near Walnut Creek. She knelt beside a crate of books donated by a neighbor named Mrs. Greeley, an older widow with a weathered face and a quiet fondness for lemon cakes. Zadie ran her fingers along the spines, mouthing titles under her breath, imagining small hands turning the pages. Later, they sat on the slope behind the schoolhouse, sharing a jar of pickled peaches and the last of the bread from breakfast. The grass was brittle beneath them, but the air was mild, and the wind carried the scent of creosote. Oliver reached for a peach slice and said, "I never asked." "That dance school, did you ever go back?" Zadie shook her head. "The letter came 2 weeks after the fever took my brother Jonah. I burned it. Not out of anger, out of knowing I couldn't be 2 places at once, and I needed to bury the part of me that still hoped." He was quiet a moment. "Is it still buried?" She looked at the horizon. "I think it's been waiting, just needed a place where it didn't feel foolish to want." "You don't talk foolish," he said. "Not once." She picked a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. "You ever think of marrying?" He blinked at her, then set the jar down. "Once. Long time ago." She was a rancher's daughter in Chino Valley. We were both too young. She left for California before I could finish building the porch. Zadie tilted her head. You didn't follow. I thought I needed to make something steady first. Truth is, I was scared I'd turn out like my father, always chasing land, never home long enough to keep a promise. She stared at the grass. Do you think you'd make a good husband now? He met her eyes. If the right woman asked me, I'd spend every day trying to be. The silence after was not uncertain. She reached over and took his hand, their fingers lacing without hesitance. I want to build something with you, she said. Not just a school or a home, a life. His voice was low. You sure? I'm not afraid anymore, not of staying, not of loving you. He turned toward her fully and pulled her close, his hand resting at the nape of her neck, thumb brushing along her hairline. When he kissed her, it was slow and rooted, like something long planted finally blooming. They married at the small chapel outside Prescott on the first Sunday of September. Zadie wore a cream-colored cotton dress sewn by Mrs. Greeley, with small blue flowers stitched at the collar. Oliver stood beside her in his best shirt and a clean shave, his hand steady as he held hers. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple. But when they stepped out into the sun, the gathered neighbors threw handfuls of dried petals, and Jasper, freshly brushed and tied with a strip of ribbon, stamped the earth like he understood the moment. That winter, the school opened with 7 children seated at pine desks built by Oliver from the oak trees felled behind the ridge. Zadie taught them letters and numbers, but also how to watch the sky for signs of weather, how to listen to the wind like it had something to say. Oliver spent his days working the ranch, and his evenings building a porch onto the house he'd once thought might never hold more than himself. Zadie danced there sometimes, barefoot in the dusk, her movements small and content, like a woman who'd found her breath again. In the spring, she planted chamomile near the windows and a single rose bush beside the front steps. Oliver teased her for its stubbornness, but she said she liked things that grew slow and steady. The following year, they welcomed a girl with Zadie's dark hair and Oliver's quiet eyes. They named her Clara, after the teacher who'd once taught Zadie her first letters back in Missouri. Clara grew up chasing chickens and asking questions no one had answers for, and when she laughed, it echoed across the pasture like music. In the evenings, after the chores were done and Clara was tucked into her bed, Zadie and Oliver would sit on that porch, hands entwined, watching the moon rise over the hills. They didn't need many words. Love had found them not in the grand or sudden, but in the long, faithful unfolding of days. And in that quiet corner of the Arizona Territory, the woman who'd once stood barefoot in a ghost town and the man who'd offered her a place to rest made a life that held, not perfect, but whole. And theirs.